Tim Ryan wants to codify into federal law the very cheating which led to the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Tim Ryan in the House of Representatives is a co-sponsor of the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. What is the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act? Well, it's presented to us as being a compromise between the more radical leftists who wanted entire federalization of presidential elections and conservatives who don't want that, and rightly so. The John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act isn't as extreme, Tim Ryan says. Well, that's a lie. That's a complete lie. If you look at the language of the bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act does give power to the federal government. It takes away the state's autonomy to run elections themselves and gives it to the federal government. It's done through a provision called pre-clearance. What is pre-clearance? Pre-clearance gives the federal government, in this case, a federal government run by Joe Biden, power over every state's decision about the election process in their own state. So the federal government would have the power to veto anything that a state wanted to do if it came to a change in the election process. I'm talking about voter ID. A state couldn't pass voter ID, even if it went through the legislative process, even if it was a ballot referendum. The federal government would have to approve that first. Do you think the federal government would allow maybe a swing state like Ohio to approve voter ID? I don't think so. What if a state wants to prohibit ballot harvesting because it's vulnerable to fraud? The federal government would have to give the A-OK first. Do you think the federal government would give the A-OK? I don't think so. What about removing dead people from voter rolls? What if a state wanted to do that so that there wasn't any issue with dead people voting, like what happens in Chicago? The federal government would have to give an okay, would have to approve that. They could veto a law, overturn the will of the people in that state if the people voted for representatives who passed that legislatively. That's what the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act does. The Department of Justice, run by Merrick Garland in the Biden administration, would have the power to change where polling locations are located, voter registration requirements, and the federal government would seize the power of redistricting in states, taking that away from state legislatures. This is what Tim Ryan supports. So this guy that is simultaneously saying that we must kill and confront the mega extremists, he's dehumanizing you. Why? To exact control over you, to criminalize your speech so that you can't criticize when his law codifies the cheating that happened in the 2020 election and every other election in the future, cementing Democrats' power at the federal level into perpetuity. Who would vote for this guy?